So in this video, I would like to explain irregular verb conjugation in the present tense in Russian. As I said in the previous video, most verbs in Russian have a t ending, with the main conjugation patterns being verbs that end in at and it. Verbs that end in at have one pattern, and verbs that end in it have a second pattern. However, there could be different verbs with different vowel endings which may follow one of these patterns. So in this video, I'll explain the irregular concepts that some of these conjugations have. With the second verb conjugation, let's not forget that the pattern is affected by spelling rules in the first person singular pronoun, which is ya. When using the second conjugation, we have to pay attention to the stem of the infinitive, which is the word itself before it. Because of the spelling rule for the pronoun ya, we'll sometimes have to change or add a letter to keep a perfect sound when the conjugation is said. Here's a small pattern that we can follow, and I will give examples to practically show how this concept works. If the last letter of the stem is de, it becomes je. If it's ze, it likewise becomes je. S becomes sha, este becomes sha, te becomes che, and b, v, m, p, and f receive the consonant L after. This rule only applies to ya, so you have to watch out for this pattern. Let's begin with the verb chodit, which means to walk. A native speaker would say chadit, chadit. This verb has the it ending following the second conjugation pattern, and also its stem, which is chod, ends in de. Therefore, we have to change the consonant to je in the ya pronoun. Ya, chaju, ti, chodish, on or ana, ano, chodit, мы, chodим, вы, ходите, они ходят. In this case, we change de to je and also use the vowel u in the ya pronoun to keep a perfect sound when the word is said. Let's not forget that there could be different verbs with different vowel endings which may follow this pattern. As a reminder, the second conjugation pattern in the present can use a different vowel in the ya and ani pronouns, and it's done on purpose to preserve a uniform sound. Here, we have the verb vozit, which informally means to drive or to carry something or someone by car. A native speaker would say vazit, vazit. This verb has the it ending following the second conjugation pattern, and also its stem ends in ze, which means that we have to change the consonant to je in the ya pronoun. Ya vaju, ti vozish, on vozit. Мы возим, вы возите, они возят. In this case, we change ze to je and also use the vowel u in the ya pronoun. Here, we have the verb nosit, which means to carry. A native speaker would say nasit. This verb ends in it, following the second pattern and having the consonant s at the end of the stem, meaning that we have to change s to sha in the ya pronoun. Я ношу, ты носишь, он носит, мы носим, вы носите, они носят. In this case, we change s to sha and also use the vowel u in the ya pronoun. Here, we have the verb mstit, which means to revenge. This verb ends in it, following the second pattern and having the consonants s and te at the end of the stem, meaning that we have to change s and te to sha in the ya pronoun. Я мщу, ты мстишь, он мстит, мы мстим, вы мстите, они мстят. Here we have the verb платить, which means to pay. It ends in it and has the consonant te at the end of the stem, meaning that we have to change te to che in the ya pronoun. Я плачу, ты платишь, он платит, мы платим, вы платите, они платят. Finally, we made it to the category of stem verbs ending in b, v, m, p, and f, which receive the consonant L after in the ya pronoun. To keep things quick, I'll just show one verb in each category that receives the consonant L after in the ya pronoun. любить means to love, and it receives L after be in the я pronoun, while everything else stays the same. Я люблю, and it also has the vowel U instead of U. Давить means to weigh or to pressure, and it gets L after ve in the я pronoun, while everything else is the same. Я давлю, also having U in the end. Кормить means to feed, and it gets L after M in the я pronoun. Я кормлю, also having U in the end. Копить means to save, and it gets L after P in the я pronoun. Я коплю, also having U in the end. At last, we have a foreign verb, surfit, which means to surf, and it gets L after F in the я pronoun. Я surfлю, also having U in the end. Overall, this is how the second conjugation works with all of the exceptions and spelling rules. Now, there are various irregular verbs in Russian that don't exactly follow the rules that I just showed. Even though irregular verbs can still follow the grammatical endings of one of the existing patterns, there may be some changes to the letters of the conjugations. Still, it's possible to predict the endings once you know the stems of the verbs, so even irregular verbs follow the first or second conjugation pattern. Take the verb ехать as an example. This verb means to go or travel by car, and visually it ends in at, so it will follow the first conjugation pattern. However, due to the irregular ending of the stem, which is yech, this verb changes a consonant in the stem itself throughout all of the conjugations along with a vowel. Я еду, ты едешь, он едет, мы едем, вы едете, они едут. Notice that once you know the stem yed, it basically follows the first conjugation pattern, except having an u in the ya and ani pronouns. This verb has the same pattern as the first conjugation, but it simply changes a consonant and a vowel to keep a perfect sound. While some verbs keep the grammatical form of the first conjugation pattern, they may change the sound of a vowel to keep a perfect sound, like the verb давать, meaning to give. Visually, this verb will have the same pattern as the first conjugation, but it will change the vowel ye to yo when the stress falls on the ending. This verb still has the same pattern as the first conjugation, but it simply changes ye to yo in the ты, он, мы, and вы pronouns, and it's done on purpose to keep a perfect sound. Я даю, ты даешь, он дает, мы даем, вы даете, они дают. Then we have this irregular verb, бежать, meaning to run, which has an interesting pattern. You would think that it would follow the first conjugation pattern because it ends in at, but it actually follows the second pattern. Because it follows the second pattern, it changes a consonant in the я and они pronouns to keep a perfect sound. Also, it has the vowel u in the я and они pronouns. Я бегу, ты бежишь, он бежит, мы бежим, вы бежите, они бегут. Then we have this verb, хотеть, which means to want. What's irregular about хотеть is that it follows the first conjugation pattern in the я, ты, and он pronouns while also changing a consonant and using the vowel u at the end of the я pronoun. Then it follows the second conjugation pattern in the мы, вы, and они pronouns. Я хочу, ты хочешь, он хочет, мы хотим, вы хотите, они хотят. Then we have verbs that are completely irregular with no pattern to follow. The best way to use these verbs is to remember them. Пить means to drink, and it actually follows the grammatical endings of the first conjugation pattern, but it changes ye to yo while putting the мягкий знак after pe to keep a perfect sound. Я пью, ты пьешь, он пьет, мы пьем, вы пьете, они пьют. Then we have this irregular verb, жить, which means to live. Жить takes the grammatical endings of the first conjugation pattern, changes ye to yo adds the consonant v in the middle and uses the vowel u in the ya and ani pronouns. Я живу, ты живешь, он живет, мы живем, вы живете, они живут. Then we have the most irregular verb, which is есть. The verb есть has a double meaning, with the first being to eat and with the second being to be. As in the sentence, there are many people. Есть много людей. In the context of irregular verbs, есть means to eat. Я ем, ты ешь, он ест, мы едим, вы едите, они едят. The only recognizable element of есть is that it follows the second conjugation pattern in the мы, вы, and они pronouns. Everything else about this verb is completely irregular. At last, one final concept must be shown about irregular verbs that similarly follow the same grammatical endings as one of the conjugation patterns. Because there are so many endings for verbs ending in t, it's possible to tell what conjugation pattern such verbs will follow. However, there is a third common ending in Russian verbs aside from at and it, which ends in t. T is the third common ending in Russian verbs which still follows one of the patterns, typically the first one. One interesting concept to know about this ending is that once you know the verb's stem, you can predict the endings, even if the verbs are irregular, like the verbs идти and нести, and you're about to see why. Идти means to go, and the verb's stem is id, which is kept in all conjugations of the first pattern, but it changes the ye to yo in 60% of the pronouns and has the vowel u in the ya and ani pronouns. Я иду, ты идешь, он идет, мы идем, вы идете, они идут. As I said previously, once you know the verb's stem, you can predict which grammatical endings will be placed. Нести means to carry, and the verb's stem is nes, which is kept in all conjugations of the first pattern, but just like the verb идти, it changes the ye to yo in 60% of the pronouns and has the vowel u in the ya and ani pronouns. Я несу, ты несешь, он несет, мы несем, вы несете, они несут. This is how you conjugate irregular verbs in the present tense in Russian. Before I end the video, I would like to show one small fundamental in the formation of Russian verbs that you don't necessarily have to use, but you have to know. In Russian, the infinitive form of verbs generally corresponds to the dictionary form. Russian infinitives typically end in t and t, which are general categories that split themselves into multiple subcategories, ultimately making two conjugation patterns in the present tense. Additionally, there could be irregular verbs that may have completely different endings, and those verbs will still follow one of the existing patterns. For instance, you may find verbs that end in ch, and despite having very different endings, such verbs will still follow either the first or second conjugation pattern. Whenever you learn verb conjugation in Russian, you need to familiarize yourself with these verb conjugations to facilitate the accurate formation of the infinitive. Nonetheless, you should always know that Russian has only two conjugation patterns in the present, but because there are many irregular verbs, you may find irregular changes, like additional letters and changes in consonants, vowels, and stems, while conjugating verbs. Keep this idea in the back of your mind whenever you conjugate verbs in the present tense in Russian.